Chapter 1. Extract from Dr. Wilmore's diary, June the 24th, 1700. Rode to the Great Horse Fair at Bromsgrove. My saddlebags well stuffed with my infallible remedies, prepared after the prescriptions of my ever-to-be-honoured master, Dr. Nicholas Culpepper, of the most part of which I disposed to good advantage. Late in the evening, failing to meet there my neighbours, in whose company I was to have returned, was fain to ride alone. Crossing the open country as you go up towards Butler's Hill, it being then almost dark, 2 horsemen came upon me, and laying hold of my mare by the bridle, offered me violence with their pistols. They had for their disguise black masks tied over their faces, but that they were gentlemen was to be known by their horses, dress, and speech, and in truth, of the name and quality of one of them, I make no question. Seeing that I was in their hands, and unable to help myself, I held it best to entreat them humbly, and to pray them to release me, a poor old man, and beneath the notice of their worships. But these villainous thieves and cutthroats called me an ancient cheat and quacksalver, and they swore with many oaths that they would have every coin which I had wheeled out of the gaping forgemen and bumpkins of Bromsgrove. They pulled me from my horse and set me, with much violence, on my buttocks in the road. Opening my saddlebags, they found in the first my purse of money, chiefly in silver, in amount £8, 9 shillings, and a groat, which they took, well pleased, looking to still find more in the other bag. But when they came to it, and found in it only such of my medicines as remained unsold, they reviled me by many foul names, and one of them swore he would shoot me for having so disappointed them. They were far gone in liquor, having doubtless been to Bromsgrove Fair. The other answered that it would be folly to waste good lead upon one such as I was, and that it would be more fitting to make an end of me, as I made an end of others, namely with my own medicines. He quoted the phrase, lax talionis, the law of retaliation, which proved him to have had such learning as made his abominable wickedness more unpardonable. By continually threatening me with the points of their swords, they forced me to swallow all that was left of my sovereign salve for corns, together with my miraculous carbuncle powder of dried toads, and a large draught of my precious aqua espiritus lambricornum magistralia. After which fiendish behaviour they strapped my knees together, and my arms against my sides, with my own stirrup leathers, and so rolled me into a large bed of thistles and stinging nettles, as they told me for my health's sake, till I had received due benefit of my medicine. There they left me, driving off my mare before them. Of the qualms, retchings, and pain I endured, words serve not to tell. I was unable to rise by reason of the tightness of my bonds, and when my pains caused me to roll to and fro, the nettles and thistles vexed me greatly, grievously. And there I might have lain till I died, had not young Thomas Spencer of Waite's Farm come that way, who released me from my bonds and brought me my saddlebags, in which were aqua vitae and some other cordials, of which I stood sorely in need. Also he set me upon my mare, and brought me to my own door at the gatehouse. This young man very properly refused the money which I was so rash to offer him for his services, and therefore I must find other means to reward him, since I am well assured that one of these gentlemen cutthroats was young George Cooks of Norgrove Hall, and that any attempt of mine to obtain justice upon him would frustrated through the influence of Sir Thomas Cooks of Bentley, to whom he is some cousin. I am resolved to take my own private measures for his punishment, and more especially for the recovery of the money. Chapter 2. Tom Spencer was also returning home that night from Bromsgrove Fair, when he rescued the trussed-up doctor, and he had to pass the Spencer family farm, Waite's farm, in order to deliver Dr. Wilmore safely into the hands of his servant, Yat Yelp, in the old Bordsley Abbey gatehouse. He had to retrace his steps past his home again, to call on his pretty cousin, Phillis Spencer, at Lowndes Hill Farm. Although it was late evening, Phillis was looking out for him, as he had promised to bring her a gift from the fair. She was annoyed with Tom for being so late, but she soon forgave him and ran inside the house to unwrap her present. Tom remained on the porch, telling Phyllis's uncle, old John Spencer, about the attack on the doctor by the two masked highwaymen. John Spencer inquired eagerly whether the doctor had recognised either of his assailants, and Tom replied that he had indicated the identity of one of them, pointing in the direction of Fox Lydiot, or some place beyond it. His uncle nodded, fully understanding that the doctor had good reasons for thinking it was George Cooks, about whom there were many ugly rumours locally. It would not have been wise, however, for the Spencers to have spoken openly about their suspicions of George Cooks, owing to his kinship with Sir Thomas Cooks of Bentley Manor. There was a strong bond of affection between Phyllis and her cousin Tom, for she had lived at Lowndes Hill Farm under the guardianship of her uncle since the death of her wealthy father in 1686. Her father had started a flourishing tea business in Cheapside, and had left his only child, Phyllis, a large fortune of £10,000. The Spencer family and local people expected that Tom and Phyllis would marry in the near future. However, George Cooks had been flattering Phyllis with his attentions at certain social gatherings. Her guardian, old John Spencer, did all he could to discourage any friendship between the young scapegrace, George Cooks, and his 18-year-old niece. The contrast between the two rival suitors could not have been greater. Tom Spencer was a steady, good-hearted and good-looking young farmer, while George Cooks had all the advantages of education from being the son of a country gentleman. He was a handsome rake of a man who dressed like a dandy of the time, often in a gold-laced coat with lace ruffles, set off by an expensive cocked hat, and fine shoes with diamond buckles. Tom Spencer's plain address of a yeoman farmer looked dull in comparison, but George Cooks was living well beyond his means, and like some other impoverished younger sons of country gentlemen of the time, he was replenishing his funds by highway robbery during his absences from Norgrove Hall, where he was staying. Sir Thomas Cooks had assigned Norgrove Hall to a branch of his family a few years earlier. There is little doubt that George Cooks was bent upon marrying the Spencer heiress, even though the Spencer family was inferior to the Cooks family in social rank. Chapter 3. 2 months later, a great party was held at Yule Grange to celebrate the coming of age of Lord Windsor, the second Earl of Plymouth. All the tenants on the Windsor estate were invited to this party, in the grounds of the old Grange. Sheep and oxen were roasted whole in front of the house, which was pulled down a few years later to build another in the prevailing Queen Anne style. The Spencer family were important guests as the longest-standing tenants on the Windsor estate, and Tom Spencer had many duties to perform for the young Earl in order to keep the barrels of beer flowing and the fiddlers playing for the dancing. He was so busy with these duties that Phillis thought that she was being neglected by him, and was glad of the attentions of George Cooks, and she danced repeatedly with that reckless gentleman. Old John Spencer and his wife left the party early before their niece Phillis was ready to go, but she had her maid, Mattie Briggs, with her, and Tom was left in charge to escort them home. George Cooks also left Phillis to speak to one of his cronies, Henry Hardwick, who was lodging at the village inn, the Fox in Fox Lydiot. Hardwick was not a local man, but he had become known as a heavy drinker and companion of George Cooks. The Fox was kept by Mabel Bates, the mother of Tony Bates, who was courting Mattie Briggs. Phillis grew impatient waiting for Tom to take her home, and decided to walk home to Lones Hill on her own, for her maid had also slipped away with Tony Bates. Phillis made for the footpath towards Salter's Lane leading to Lones Hill Farm, and she passed the spot where George Cooks and Henry Hardwick were talking without seeing them in the trees. Hardwick was drunk, but not too drunk to notice the attractions of Phillis as she passed, and he said to his friend, "There goes the prettiest girl I've seen for a long time. I'm going after her to steal a kiss." Cooks restrained him with the words, "As you are my friend, Harry, you will do nothing of the sort. That girl is worth £10,000, and I mean to marry her." Hardwick replied, "Then just because I am your friend, I'll do it. I'll go and take my kiss. My lady will cry for help, and you can come and drive me off, and she'll fall into your arms." Cooks laughed. "Go on then. Take your kiss, but hang me if I don't spoil your sport before you have time to taste her lips." Dr. Wilmore was also a guest at the Hill Grange party, and he had been gathering the herb Bettany from a remote part of the park around the Grange. He saw Phillis walking alone along the footpath, and the girl's alarm when she saw a drunken stranger following her. Phillis tried to hurry on, but Hardwick seized her from behind, on the shoulder and wrist, muttering, "Stay a minute. One kiss before we part." She gave a little scream and struggled to free herself. The old doctor then saw Tom Spencer run up with a stout oak stick in his hand. Hardwick let the girl go in order to defend himself with his sword, and Phillis ran towards her home. He lunged angrily at Tom and wounded him, but Tom hit him on the head with his stick with all his force. Hardwick dropped the poleaxe to the ground and appeared to be dead. Tom stood perfectly still, aghast at what he had done. He forgot that he was hurt and could only think that he had been too hasty and heavy-handed. George Cooks had seen the fray from the distance and arrived in time to see his friend stretched out on the ground, with Tom standing over him. At the same time, Dr. Wilmore stepped out from the trees and heard Cooks call Tom a scoundrel and had the following threat. "You have killed my friend, and you shall hang for it, or my name is not George Cooks." Tom was too afraid of the consequences of his action to make any reply. The doctor knelt down to examine the prostrate man, and he shook his head as he looked at the head wound. "He's still breathing, and that is as much as can be said." While Cooks was bending over Hardwick's body, the doctor rose and touched Tom on the arm and whispered, "This is an ugly business. Go home and avoid Cooks. He is an evil man and means mischief to you." He then pointed to the blood trickling from Tom's side. "You're hurt as well. I will come and attend to you as soon as I've done all I could do for the dying man." Tom walked slowly home, leaning on his stick, feeling faint, dizzy and frightened. Chapter 4. Dr. Wilmore pronounced that Hardwick had only a slight chance of recovery, and under his directions the unconscious man was carried back to the Fox Inn. Meanwhile, George Cooks began to think that the death of Hardwick would make his position safer, for Hardwick knew too many ugly secrets, and he drank too much to keep them to himself. Also, if Hardwick died, Tom Spencer would either hang for it or flee the country, clearing the way for him to marry Phillis and end his financial troubles. Cooks even considered that he could bribe Dr. Wilmore to make sure that Hardwick would never recover. Nevertheless, he visited his former partner in crime so often at the Fox Inn that people began to revise their bad opinion of Cooks because of the concern he appeared to be showing. Tom Spencer was not arrested because he was too confined to bed with his wound, which turned out to be more severe than it appeared at first. His condition was aggravated by his anxiety and remorse, and became almost as critical as Hardwick's. Phillis was greatly distressed about Tom, especially as Dr. Wilmore forbade her to visit him. The doctor's precautions were fruitless, however. For 2 weeks after the fight, a coffin bearing the name of Tom Spencer was buried in the graveyard of St. Stephen's Chapel, attended by all the Spencer family and friends. Shortly afterwards, Henry Hardwick was reported to have suffered a sudden relapse, and his body was driven off by night by Tony Bates from the Fox Inn, to be buried at Upton Snodsbury, where he came from. The way was open now for George Cooks to court and marry Phillis, and he sent letters to her through Tony Bates and her maid, Mattie. But Phillis gave him no encouragement, and her uncle forbade him to visit Lowndes Hill Farm. The thought kept on returning to haunt her that Tom had died receiving his fatal wound in her defence, and she was full of remorse for her unkind words to him on the night of the party. She now realised, when it was too late, the depth of her affection towards Tom, and she could not respond to any other suitor. Not content to wait, Cooks hit on a plan to influence Phillis in his favour. She had become a patient of Dr. Wilmore because her grief had affected her health, and she welcomed the doctor's visits when they often spoke about Tom. Aware of the doctor's skill in the mystic sciences, she hinted that she longed to see Tom once again, as he had been in life, and that she would pay him handsomely if he could make this possible. The doctor warned her about the dangers of conjuring the spirits of the dead, but she insisted that she would obey his instructions to the full. Finally, the doctor agreed to try and raise Tom's spirit, telling her, "Such art as I have shall be at your command." Chapter 5. It was on All Hallows Eve, or All Souls, when Phillis and her maid Mattie, both well muffled against the chilly air and against being identified, arrived at the ancient Abbey gatehouse to keep her appointment with Dr. Wilmore. On that auspicious night, when the souls of the dead were thought to revisit their homes, the doctor was going to attempt to raise the spirit of Tom Spencer. Yat Yelp, the doctor's dumb hump-backed servant, conducted Phillis up a winding staircase to the doctor's sanctum, leaving her maid in the lodge below. He made a sign to Phillis to sit at the table in this lofty room over the archway, which was lit by a solitary candle and a dim fire in a wide hearth. In the flickering shadows, Phillis could see a roof of finely wrought oak timbers, open to the ridged tree and walls pierced with Gothic windows and doorways. Ranged around the walls were shelves containing skulls, human bones, strange objects floating in bottles, dried toads, herbs, roots, dragon's blood, and a few large antique volumes. An ancient tapestry stretched across the farther end of the room, facing which was a large carved oak seat, formerly one of the choir stalls from the Abbey church. The doctor entered this room of mysteries from an adjoining tower, wearing a long furred gown and a fur cap on his head, and seated himself opposite his visitor. "So your courage has not failed you, child. You are determined to go through with this matter?" "I am sure," Phillis answered firmly. The doctor told her that he could use either a crystal or a mirror in which she might see the man she loved. In using the crystal, however, she would only be able to see Tom and would be unable to speak to him. If he used the mirror, she would be able to ask the image in it questions which the image could only answer by making signs. Phillis said, "The mirror will content me." Dr. Wilmore then gave her a stern warning. "As you value your life, do not look behind you, nor to the right or left." "You may rely on my obedience," Phillis answered quietly. The doctor summoned his dwarfish servant to light 2 large wax candles and to put a brazier with live coals on the table. Yat-Yelp then conducted Phillis to the large oak seat and stationed himself beside the curtain in front of the mirror, ready to withdraw it at the right moment. His master undid the clasps of a large volume and read out sentences in Latin, throwing some aromatic powder onto the live coals in the brazier, which gave off a dense cloud of smoke and a sweet odour. At a signal from the doctor, Yat-Yelp drew aside the curtain on which Phillis had fixed her eyes. As the mirror was revealed, Phillis at first could see nothing except the reflection of curdling eddies of smoke. But as the smoke cleared, she saw the face of Tom Spencer. He seemed a little paler than when she last saw him in Hill Park, but he was otherwise unchanged, and his eyes were gazing intently upon her own. "Does the form appear?" asked the sorcerer, who had hidden his face in his gown. "It does." "Speak to it. You may ask 3 questions only, and its time is brief." For some moments, Phillis seemed unable to speak. At last, she said slowly and distinctly, "Tom Spencer, do you still love me? If so, smile as you smiled when you were alive." The face in the mirror smiled, and Phillis then asked, "Is it your wish to end my useless grief and think of marrying someone else? Frown if this is not your wish." A most decided frown passed over the face in the mirror. "Ask your 3rd question quickly, the vision will go soon." "Tell me your own state, Tom Spencer. Are you at peace? Does that man's blood lie heavily on you? Nod if you are at peace." The face in the mirror replied with a dismal shaking of the head. The doctor threw more powder on the brazier, and smoke obscured the mirror again, and the dwarf let the curtain fall over it. Chapter 6. 1 month later, in December, Dr. Wilmore was jogging slowly on his sprig-tailed mare along the road by Fox Lydiot when he met George Cooks riding rapidly towards Norgrove Hall. The doctor's thin figure was enveloped in a black riding cloak from the heels of his heavy boots to the brims of his black cocked hat. Cooks reined up his horse and said briskly, "Your influence with that perverse minx at Lone's Hill has not been worth a straw. She refuses even to see me. What do you say if I propose to carry her off and marry her without her guardian's permission?" The doctor replied sharply, "I say that you can't mean it, and heaven forbid that if I should consent to harm a hair on her head." "Nonsense, man, 'twould do her no harm. Women like a little rough wooing at heart. It would make her the wife of a gentleman." The doctor looked grave and said bluntly, "It would be a lawless deed. What if I should make your plans known? What hinders me?" "A certain transaction at the Fox Inn, in which you are more implicated than I am." Dr. Wilmore shook his head sadly. Would that I had had no hand in the bad business with Henry Hardwick. That pious wish comes too late. Hardwick is dead and buried, but I want your help in carrying Phillis off. There are 50 guineas for you when I marry her and secure her fortune. All that you have to do is to bring her alone to some spot where my friends and I can carry her off. How can I do this? That's your affair. You brought her to the Abbey ruins once to witness some of your hocus pocus. You can do so again. Aye, said the doctor thoughtfully. I might take her to the remoter part of the ruins, but only on the condition that you repay me the sum of £8, 9 shillings and a groat. Cooks looked perplexed, and the old man explained. Money's borrowed from me on the day of Bromsgrove Fair. Cooks laughed. So you knew I and Hardwick played the highwaymen. Well, well, that much you shall have in advance. A few days after this meeting, in the week before Christmas, Phillis and her maid made their way from Lowndes Hill to the ancient gatehouse for a secret appointment with Dr. Wilmore. Phillis believed that he was making another attempt to raise the spirit of Tom Spencer. Once again she was led into the doctor's sanctum, but when he saw that Phillis was seated, the doctor hurried away to the ruined refectory, the old common dining room of the Bawdsley monks. The roof of this spacious room had fallen in, and its broken walls were covered in ivy. Moonlight was streaming through its shattered windows, but a lantern was burning on a small table in the centre of the room, which also held a rusty sword and a heavy volume printed in Latin. As the doctor approached this table, a man stepped out into the moonlight to meet him. It was George Cooks. All is well, said Dr. Wilmore. Phillis Spencer is in my room, ready to come here. Cooks advanced. I trust you because you cannot afford to deceive me. Here, take back your paltry loan. And he threw a handful of coins on the table. The doctor counted the money deliberately by the light of the candle. £8, 9 shillings and a groat. You have reckoned correctly. I will use no violence if she listens to reason, said Cooks. But she does not. Bates and I can carry her across the fields to the turn for Birmingham, where I have a coach waiting. You have chosen a good, quiet spot. This is an evil business, but I will bring her here. Dr. Wilmore returned to his room, where he explained the delay to Phillis, by the need to wait until the stars were favourable. He then told her, the time has now come. Follow me to the place. Is it not here? Asked the girl, rather uneasily. Shall I not see him here? No, not here. This time our rites must be performed under the open sky. Follow me. Despite her misgivings, she followed the doctor, who led her to the ruins of the refectory. Stand here, he told her, pointing to the place beside the table. Do not pass beyond the circle, which I shall draw. You will soon see your lover appear. He described a circle around the table with the point of a rusty sword. He mumbled some passages from the book. Phillis Spencer's gaze was fixed on a dim figure moving in the shadow of the ivied wall towards the table. When it emerged into the full moonlight, she could not identify it, for its face was covered by the corner of its cloak. The figure came onto the circle, and as it flung back its cloak, Phillis at last saw the face. A cry of alarm and disappointment came from her, for it was the face of George Cooks, and not Tom Spencer. Chapter 7. Before Phillis had recovered from her shock and disappointment, George Cooks seized her hand, and she turned crying to Dr. Wilmore for help. To her dismay, the doctor had disappeared. Phillis, pleaded Cooks, forgive this trick. I have been driven to it by your unjust guardian. You must know how passionately I love you. I swear I will never leave you until you promise to marry me." "Impossible, impossible," Phillis cried. "It is possible, and it must be, but we have no time to lose. A coach is waiting for us, and in a few hours we will be married." "Let me go," cried Phillis, struggling to free her hand. "By Jove, you shall not go. I will make a gentlewoman, in spite of yourself." Cooks pulled the girl forward and put his hand over her mouth. He then gave 3 low whistles for his henchmen to come to his aid. A man appeared from behind a broken wall, but it was not Bates, and Cook shrank back in his fear and astonishment, for it appeared to be Tom Spencer, his dead rival. Phillis also drew back at the sight of this apparition, and fell fainting to the ground. Cooks quickly recovered his nerve and drew his sword, exclaiming, "Man, ghost or devil, whichever you are, have at you," and he lunged forward to run the apparition through. He fell over a stone, however, in the poor light, and the spirit caught him by the arm, wrenching the sword from his grasp and throwing it high over the ivied wall. The phantom then shouted, "Fair fighting now, man to man. I'm ready for you." Cook saw that he was fighting with no ghost, and the 2 men exchanged blows thick and fast. Although Cooks was a strong man, he was no match for his opponent, and at last he lay still moaning on the ground, unable to respond to the invitation to get up for more punishment. A number of people had seen the fight between Cooks and Tom Spencer. Mattie had arrived and was attending to her mistress with the doctor. Tony Bates was also there and had seen Dr. Wilmore rub his hands with satisfaction when Cooks had gone down for the last time. Tom transferred his attention from Cooks to Phillis, who was now coming round. Her recovery speeded by a kiss from her lover. "Tom, can it be you?" she asked faintly. "To be sure it is," he replied. "I've been alive all the time under the doctor's orders. He told me I was sure to be hanged otherwise, so he made sham dead and kept me in these ruins." While the 2 lovers were in each other's arms, Cooks began cursing Tony Bates for not helping him, and also threatened his former crony. "I can have you hanged any day if I will." Bates seemed to be in no way frightened by this threat, and replied, "You are in far more danger than I am of hanging, master. I've been offered a free pardon if I tell all I know, and Mattie has promised to marry me if I led an honest life. They are after you for highway robbery. You've been informed against." "Informed against by who?" growled Cooks. "Your old friend, Henry Hardwick." "That's a lie. Hardwick is dead." Dr. Wilmore, overhearing this exchange, came nearer and remarked, "It is even as he says. Hardwick is no more dead than Tom Spencer. You bribed me to murder him. I only gave him a sleeping draught, and got him safely out of your way. The devil you did. Hardwick has made a clean breast of all the evil deeds of you and your associates. The evidence against you is too great to be ignored this time, Master Cooks. I swore to have my revenge on you, and revenge is sweet. And now you will hand me over to the law, I suppose," Cooks said. "Not I for one," said Tom. "I've given you a thrashing. You can use your coach to get away while you can." George Cooks staggered off in the direction of his waiting coach, and was not seen again in the locality. It was a merry Christmas at Lowndes Hill Farm, and at Waite's Farm a few days later. One other entry into Dr. Wilmore's diary gives the happy outcome of this affair. It's dated 1st of January, 1701. "This day I was present in Tardywick Church. 2 couples married, Thomas Spencer to Phillis Spencer, and Anthony Bates to Mattie Briggs. As wedding gifts, I gave the young wives some excellent advice on the preservation of health. This was worth much to them and cost me nothing.